Welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast with your host, award-winning author Paul C. Thornton, a weekly conversation with the amazing cruisers featured in the Joy of Cruising trilogy, comprised of The Joy of Cruising, Cruising Interrupted, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again. Each book is a compilation of features about cruisers and cruise and travel personalities from around the world. It's the next best thing to cruising, hearing about cruising from the unique and diverse perspectives of Paul's amazing guests.
Hello, passionate cruisers. This is Paul, and this week on the Joy of Cruising podcast, I am delighted to welcome Gary Bembridge, the embodiment of the successful Tips for Travelers blog, podcast, and most notably, YouTube channel. Oh, come on, successful is an understatement. With 400,000 followers and over 140 million views, Tips for Travelers is the world's leading cruise channel, by far. I feature Gary and Tips for Travelers in Cruising Interrupted in a section called the Cruise Communicators. Gary founded Tips for Travelers as a pastime to occupy himself during his travels, 2 to 3 weeks out of a typical month, as a marketing vice president for a multinational firm. Gary has since retired as a corporate executive and now operates Tips for Travelers full-time. By the way, he has maintained his record that began during his corporate career of traveling every month consecutively for over 25 years. Beyond cruising, Gary's backstory is multifaceted, fascinating, and diverse. With regard to cruising, his content is similarly fascinating and diverse. Gary sails a wide breadth of cruise brands, from formal cruising on his beloved Cunard to brash newcomer Virgin Voyages to the largest ships in the world, like Symphony of the Seas, which we'll talk about, to ultra-luxury 5-star small ship cruising. I suspect one reason Gary is able to draw and grow such a huge following on YouTube is that he is able to talk about a 5-figure per-person cruise that most of his viewers will never sail, and yet they are transfixed to the images on the screen in Gary's informative delivery. Whenever I finish one of Gary's videos, I feel like I am back in college, except learning about something I love. Gary epitomizes the kind of individuals I wrote about in the Joy of Cruising trilogy or interviewed on the Joy of Cruising podcast. Passionate cruisers who act on their passion in fascinating ways. He went from part-time to the top of the world. Welcome, Gary, to the Joy of Cruising podcast.
Oh, thanks very much. It's great to be on.
So how are you doing?
Very good. Yes, really good. Just come back from a cruise, about to go in about a week on another one. So it's always good when that's happening. So yeah, I'm very good.
Now, you just got back from Symphony, right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah, I did.
Now I watch all of your video. Well, not all, almost all of your videos, and Symphony is kind of atypical for you.
Yeah, I mean it is more unusual because it's been a while since I've done kind of the more kind of resort lines and the big ships. But I set myself sort of a goal this year to go back and revisit all of them. So like I went on MSC, I did Symphony, and then I'm going on Norwegian Viva a little bit later in the year, because I felt it had been a while since I'd been on them, and I hadn't been on all of their bigger ships. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of revisit. And also a lot of people ask me around, would we like it? A lot of my followers that's not an atypical cruise for them either. So I thought I'd go back and revisit it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself because we definitely will talk about Symphony. That's one we share in common, and I definitely have some questions about your experience with MSC. You'll hear why. But before I get into all of that, tell the listeners about yourself, where you're from, where you live, your professional background, anything that you would like to share.
Sure. Well, so I have quite an interesting background in some ways, I think, in that I've had opportunity to do lots of different things. So I was actually born in Zimbabwe, where at the time when I was born, it was Southern Rhodesia, then became Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. So I grew up, went to school there. So I grew up during a whole period of sanctions, civil war, transferred to kind of one man, one vote. So that was very interesting kind of as a growing up kind of experience. Then I went, actually, it was in the military for a while because I did national service just towards the end of the Civil War. And I was a weapons instructor, so I learned all kind of that kind of skills. Then I went to university. Then I had always, ever since I was small, because my parents were British, my dad was English, my mum was Scottish, I'd always wanted to live in the UK. And I was always obsessed with the fact, although of course, when you look back and realize how wonderful Africa is growing up in Africa, but at the time I felt I was missing out and I wanted to see all these things that I'd read about, the pyramids and New York and Big Ben and all that stuff. So I moved after university, I moved to the UK. And then I worked for a while with Unilever, and then I worked for most of my professional life with Johnson & Johnson. So my background, I studied marketing. So that was really my background. So for most of my career at J&J, I worked on baby products. So I was kind of the global VP for marketing for baby products, which of course most people around the world kind of know. And that gave me an opportunity to just travel all around the world. So I was kind of constantly traveling. I would be 2 or 3 weeks a month, I'd be traveling because I had teams all around the world, and we were launching in China or expanding in Taiwan or whatever. So, so that was just amazing. So, and also the other thing, which I guess will kind of get into my channel, but I'm quite sort of geeky and I love kind of all this sort of stuff. So when Apple launched podcasts, I started experimenting with podcasting because I was so obsessed, as I mentioned, about seeing things. And when you're on a business trip, as you know, you probably only have a day or a weekend or something. So before I went anywhere, I'd research it like crazy. So I go and see places. So I had all this content. So I started playing around with that. 2006, when YouTube launched, I thought, well, I want to play around with that. So I started posting on that. And then at the same time as sort of YouTube launched, I discovered cruising. So, and then sort of it went from there. I'd always decided when I was going to retire when I was 55 years old. There was a goal I'd sort of set myself. So I'd always worked ever since I was quite young to be able to do that, to be able to retire when I was 55, which I did. Although actually just before I turned 55, I actually got cancer and I had chemo. And so that also sort of then kind of changed my perspective on life around, you've got to just keep going, keep seeing things. So that kind of fueled, then I retired and then kind of fueled my kind of passion. And then I had more time to spend on my podcast and the YouTube, and I focused on YouTube and then it went from there.
As I said in the intro, you have a very multifaceted career. I mean, weapons instructor, a techie, and then of course your channel and all of your traveling pursuits. We could easily spend all of our time today talking about your very rich background, but we're going to have you back. I'm pretty confident of that if you will come back. So let's just introduce our listeners to you. So you mentioned your first cruise. Talk about that first cruise. Were you hooked right away?
Yeah, and Paul, it's very interesting because I went on my first cruise sort of reluctantly. I was, I had all those stereotypes in my head. It's for old people, it's boring. Why would you want to do it, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason I went on my first cruise is I was asked to go and speak at a marketing conference. So there was a company called Richmond Events, I don't know if this still exists, that would charter ships in the UK, cruise ships in the UK, and run marketing conferences over a weekend, all different conferences. And they'd get suppliers in, and they'd get, say, the marketing director, if it was a marketing one, or the operations director if it's around operations. And then they would have guest speakers on to run a kind of a program. So I was asked to go and talk on that. And I thought, I'll go and do that. And I'll see what this cruising nonsense is about. So I got on the ship, and I was like, wow, when you see the cabins and the food and the entertainment and the shows and everything. And then it was just a cruise to nowhere. But as we were sailing, I just thought, this is wonderful. I've got to keep doing this. So I came back and I said to my partner, Mark, right, we're going to go on a cruise. I want to go on a cruise, and we're going to go on the QE2 because that's the most iconic ship at the time, the Queen Elizabeth II. But he was like, I'm not sure. So we went on a little mini cruise on the same ship that I'd been on, Aurora. And he's like, yeah, okay, this is quite fun. So then our first sort of proper cruise, if you like, was a transatlantic crossing on the QE2. So that was.
Let me back you up before we talk about QE2. And a Cunard transatlantic crossing is on my bucket list. As you'll probably hear later, my bucket list is it changes like the weather, or not changes like the weather. It gets added to. I don't drop anything off, but it gets added to every time I speak to passionate cruisers like yourself. But I remember when I wrote Cruising Interrupted, I remember how you reacted after that first QE2 cruise, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But let's go back to your very first cruise that you kind of went on. I almost got the sense, correct me if I'm wrong, you went on reluctantly.
Yes, yeah. I sort of went, yeah, I'll do it. Like, I'll go and talk on this conference, and it's like, and I was like, it's only 2 nights or whatever. I think it was 2 or 3 nights, and I'll just go and be fine, and I'll just get it over and done with. But I didn't expect to come away loving the cruise.
Were you anxious about things like seasickness, or you just cruising just was something that wasn't familiar to you?
I mean, I just assumed that cruising wasn't for me. The only thing I was anxious, so I didn't even consider that I would enjoy it, if you like. That didn't even cross my mind that I would enjoy it. But what I did worry about was seasickness. So I actually went and spoke to some people who'd been on before, like, were you seasick when you were on it? And it was sort of slightly out of season out of the UK, so it was kind of a little bit bumpy. So I did buy seasick tablets, but and I wasn't seasick. In fact, touch wood, I've never been seasick on any of my cruises. But I was worried about seasickness. Yeah.
For the listeners, just for visible effects, when Gary said touch wood, he's never been sick on a cruise. He tapped his head. So let's jump to QE2. Talk about that.
Well, I mean, again, it sort of links a little bit to when I was growing up and wanted to see all these things, and I knew about the QE2 because it was as I became aware of it when it launched, it was 1969 or something. I was growing up, and it because it was kind of like an icon of travel, I sort of decided that's the one that I really want to see as being my first proper cruise. But of course, we sort of booked it and very excitedly booked it. And we thought we'll sail across. We'll get to New York just before Christmas. We'll go to Washington for Christmas. Not, of course, realizing that crossing the North Atlantic in winter is quite the adventure. So it was an incredible experience. Partly because obviously being on the QE2 was a great experience. It was a bit of a shock because it was quite run down in many ways at that time. We imagined it to be incredibly glamorous, but it was actually looking a little bit shabby at the time. But it was an amazing.
Wow.
But also, it was the North Atlantic in the middle of December, and it was very, very rough. So there were kind of 40, 50-foot waves that was coming crashing over the bow of the ship. On the first couple of nights, less than 30% of people made it to dinner.
Wow.
Bouncing around all over the place. You had to walk in line with the motion of the sea. But I just loved it. It was just such a great experience. My partner, Mark Lesso, was really seasick, but went and got the, you can go get a jab at the medical center, slept for a couple of hours, and then he was off and ready and whatever. So that was just an incredible experience. It was just because you felt, the transatlantic anyway, which I know is on your bucket list, as you were saying, and is a real must-do on Queen Mary 2. But you get a sense, even though, of course, so many people have done it, it is a real sense of occasion. And there's sort of an atmosphere on board and on the ship about you're doing something very unique. So it's kind of different to doing a transatlantic repositioning cruise. There's something about being on the Cunard liner, sense of occasion, and also they know how to do that. They've been doing it for so long, so there's so much going on that kind of ties into that. But it was an experience.
I've been telling listeners, that I've kind of been keeping tabs. Anecdotally, I say that 9 out of 10 cruisers on their first cruise get hooked. So that's one more I can put in my column. I'm right on, because that happened for you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That point, Paul, I absolutely agree with you. As long as people get on the right cruise line. But like, if I give you an example, my sister-in-law, so I've been with my partner like 20 years, so I've known her for 20 years. And I've been trying to get her to go on a cruise for 19 and a half years. And she's like, oh, I'm not going on a cruise. I don't understand the point. Then, unfortunately, her husband, coming out of COVID, doesn't really want to fly and stuff. So they decided we have to do something that doesn't require flying. So I said, well, go on this cruise, go on a P&O cruise out of, to the fjords and stuff. And she's like, okay, we'll give it a go. They have now booked 8 cruises, including a 72-night trip around Asia. They are just completely hooked. And she's like, I can't believe that I didn't go 19 and a half years ago when you first told me to go. So I think you're right. If you get on the right cruise, the right experience, people are absolutely sucked in and hooked.
You hear that, Clea? You should hire Gary as a cruise industry ambassador. So as you began and then progressed in cruising, share what it was like watching and affecting the growth of your channel.
Yeah, I mean, Paul, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think probably I do feel like my marketing background has probably helped a bit because, I've always, other than stuff, I was just putting up stuff initially. I was putting up stuff, but actually I was still putting it up with the viewer in mind. So originally it was with my mother in mind. Like I want to show her where we're going and what we're doing. So I think I've always sort of, with my channel, thought about the viewer. Who am I talking to? What do they want to know? Why do they want to know it? How do they feel about this stuff? So I've always been very viewer-centric. So obviously, a lot of YouTube channels start more about me, if you like, look at me, here I am, this is what I'm doing, and actually are more about them than the viewer. Now, obviously, a lot of viewers like that, but I think I've always very focused on the viewers. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing that I do is I'm very into the data and I'm very obsessed on the data. So, with YouTube, they give you enormous amounts of data. But I've always, from very early on, and particularly when I want to be serious about growing the channel, focused on watch time. So every video, I look at how long are people watching, both in terms of time and percentage. And I know I've learned over time that's a really important metric for YouTube because they want to keep people on. And I was constantly then refining my videos so I'd get longer watch time. How do I keep people watching longer and longer? So that's really where I kind of have always focused. Focus on the viewer. What do they want? Why am I making this video? What do they want from it? And am I getting them to watch it as long as possible?
Mm-hmm.
And then looking at the data. And one of the things, YouTube keeps changing, keeps adapting. So all through the period of growing, I always look at the data. And every time YouTube introduces a new piece of data or a new measurement, I then look at it, figure out why they're doing that, because that means it's important. So if they introduce, watch time, or they introduce returning viewers and new viewers, anything they introduce means that it's important to their algorithm, it's important to the recommendation system. So I've always chased that. So I think that's helped me kind of grow as I love the data, think about the viewer, and look at them. Anything that YouTube's doing that they're measuring, they're doing it for a reason, and then figure out what am I going to do to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's really kind of what I feel has helped kind of grow the channel. I think obviously being passionate about it and stuff is important as well. People see that, but and constantly changing. Mm-hmm. I mean, YouTube constantly evolves, constantly changes. There's more and more cruise channels. I mean, there's at least 200-300, 250 cruise channels. So you've got to figure out within all that, which I probably should say at the beginning, is and what makes me different. Mm-hmm. So I'm always, how am I different? And obviously people start copying you or emulating you and other so you always kind of constantly think, what am I doing that's different? And I always use the analogy, whenever I go on a cruise, so like Symphony or whatever I'm going on, I always think, okay, there's probably 25, 30 YouTubers who've been on Symphony. And probably all of them are making the same video. So what am I going to do that's different? What's my take? What's my angle? So, that's also kind of really important as how, and again, that's, I guess, my marketing background. So that's what I've always tried to do over the kind of the years. Mm-hmm.
So you are not only the top cruise channel, but your dominance seems to be growing. What's that like? How much are you recognized on cruises?
A lot, but it's also interesting because, again, it comes back to the viewer and whatever. So if I go on, even a Windstar cruise, which has 300 people, on my last Windstar cruise, there was probably 25 people came up to me and said, we watch your videos. reasons we're on is because of you. If I go on Holland America, Princess, Cunard, Azamara, all of those kind of premium or smaller ships, so a lot. But it's interesting, like going on Symphony, which is one of the biggest ships I've been on, is where I was probably recognized the least, because it's not, to come back to your original point, it's not as much my core kind of audience, people who watch me. So I do recognize a lot. And I always say to people, like, if you see me on a ship, please come and say hello, because, meeting people and getting a sense of who's watching you.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you can then, what do you like? What don't you like about this cruise? What you can also sort of get a sense of, ideas and stuff. But it's great. A lot of people come to me on the very last day and say, we didn't want to bother you, but we watch your videos. It's like, you should have told me like on the first day.
So speaking of that Symphony cruise, we're Facebook friends, and I see that you just sailed Symphony, which happened to be my post restart return to the ocean. That was the first cruise I went on after the lockdown. I wanted it to be special, so I booked the largest ship in the world. Except by the time my cruise came around, it was the second largest ship in the world by a few feet as Wonder was introduced. But what were your impressions of Symphony of the Seas, which, as I alluded to earlier, is not your typical flavor of cruise?
Yeah, I think it's hard not to be impressed with Symphony, because it's a monster, but it's also very beautifully done. Inside it's very beautifully done, and also it was quite interesting having been on MSC and then going on Royal Caribbean and Symphony in relatively close to each other, because they take roughly about the same amount of passengers. But what I thought was very strong about Symphony was, the entertainment and the shows are phenomenal. They really are amazing, and the amount of resource and stuff they put against it. So I loved the shows enormously. I was also very impressed with the crew, because again, having been on some bigger ships, or even some premium bigger ships, is if the crew aren't happy, you can always tell if you've got a happy crew. And the crew seemed very happy and very jovial and very well trained and really on it. And that's difficult. Also post shutdown, that hasn't been the case. But the crew seemed very happy, and I was really impressed with service. So even with the numbers that they're dealing with, they were just really efficient and on the ball and felt really well. So I thought that was great. I also was, again, for the scale of the ship and the size of the ship, I really enjoyed the foods. So even Windjammer, buffet, because the buffet is often a torture test, isn't it, for the food? Because that's kind of massed. And I thought the stations and the choice and the food and stuff was really good. So, and all the kinds of choice, the water, so just the choice and stuff. I thought, for me, the downsides were more just the noise and the bustle. So I'm much used to, and I do prefer, like a quieter, less frantic kind of thing. There it's like it's full on. It's really hard. I have a Patreon, and I do, like, when I'm on a trip, I record Patreon videos on the ship. Trying to find some way to do it where it was quiet enough was a challenge. That's when you kind of realize just how much kind of noise there is. So, and I think that was probably the thing, and just the scale and the size. And I did miss the more, because I do like enrichment talks and that more kind of port immersion and all that kind of stuff, which didn't really exist, because that's not the focus. The focus is about and fun and whatever. So I was very impressed. I think they do what they do really well. I feel like they really understand. What I liked is, again, probably by marketing it, I feel like they really understand who they're for. The thing that I thought was, and one of the things I'm doing, as well as testing the big ships, is I'm also, because they get asked this a lot, is comparing the sort of the premium experience. So, I did Yacht Club on MSC. I did the Sweet Coastal Kitchens, thing on Royal Caribbean, and I'm going to do the Haven on Norwegian, which I haven't done any of those on the ships before. And it was interesting, because I thought what was interesting with the premium side is it is very costly. It's going to cost you the same as going on a small ship experience. And I thought they had the hardware very good. in that, the coastal kitchen was good, the suite deck was very nice, and that sort of stuff. But it was the kind of the detail that was kind of lacking in that premium experience. Because again, that's not really their focus. Their focus is a more kind of resort, experience. So that I thought was okay, but for the money, I thought it was okay.
And you said earlier you like the food. Did you try specialty restaurants other than Coastal Kitchen?
No, I didn't. This one I didn't, because I'm actually going back on Symphony in the Caribbean in March. So this one I decided I was going to focus, also because I paid for for a suite, and it was like, I don't want to then
Sure.
that was expensive. So I thought, right, I'm going to get my suite out of Coastal Kitchen. So I didn't. I basically used Coastal Kitchen and Windjammer. But when I go back in March in the Caribbean, I'll do more of the specialty. I went and looked at all the specialty, but I didn't sort of spend the money on them.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch your vlogs after your follow up. My trip on Symphony was the first time that I ever did on any cruise unlimited dining, and the reason is because Symphony has, well, there's some new ships coming out that will surpass it. But right now, Symphony has the most restaurants. Well, I guess Wonder has already surpassed it. Has the most restaurants of any ship. And so I just decided, I can remember a time when I didn't do any specialty dining. But this was the one time I decided, hey, let's get the unlimited specialty dining. And I tried them all. And including one I tried twice because I really loved it. So I'll be interested in your findings in March.
So which is the one you went to twice, just so I know that when I'm planning?
It's called Hooked.
Oh yeah.
I'm a big seafood guy. I actually went to dinner twice, and then I went to lunch once. I actually went there 3 times.
Oh, okay.
So
well, that's good.
But if you're not a huge seafood fan, don't even bother. Okay, you are. Okay, good. Let's go back a little to just before the cruise shut down. The reason is I recall from when I wrote your feature in Cruising Interrupted that you were on the ocean at the dawn of the cruising stoppage. So talk about that.
Yeah, that was quite an experience. So yeah, I was on Holland America, Zaandam, and I was sailing the partial transit Panama Canal itinerary. So before I went, it was when things were sort of kicking off. So it was beginning of March, and it was end of February, beginning of March, 2020, and things were sort of kicking off a little bit. And I thought, well, it was still there. It was seen as like a far away. It was a China problem, whatever it was. It was seen as like not a big deal. So anyway, so I went. We set sail, and as we sailed, as we were sailing, the story started building. This is becoming a bigger issue. People were talking about maybe going to lockdown and so on. And then we were leaving. So we went down sort of Caribbean, Curacao, and then we were heading back up into the partial transit of Panama. And then it was the time when things were kicking off a bit, and the Trump administration at the time then announced that they were going to stop all flights. No, not flights. They were going to stop people coming in from Europe. So I was like, okay, that's not too bad because the UK wasn't on that list, so I'd still be able to get home. Then then we were to the day we were in the Panama Canal. Just before we were in the Panama Canal, the captain said, like, all the excursions have been cancelled because Panama won't let anyone get off the ship. Then we were in the Panama Canal. The Trump administration then announced that they were stopping all people coming in from the UK. And I was madly thinking, how am I going to get home? I realized the flights were still going. And then it was clear made the announcement that they were shutting down, that cruisers were going to stop cruising for a month, I think, if I remember correctly, for a month. And
so they hoped.
Exactly. So the captain came on and said, okay, this has happened. However, we've spoken to head office and we've decided that we're not going to head straight back to Fort Lauderdale. We're still going to do the stop in Costa Rica. and I think we had one other stop, and then we will get back. So we're actually going to get back a couple of days after the official shutdown. So we did. We then started. We carried on sailing, knowing that ships were heading back. Ships have been cancelled. We got to Costa Rica, which was our first stop afterwards, and we went on a tour. And the guy who took us on the tour went into like the rainforest and stuff, and they were really kind of quite stressed because they were saying like all these ships have cancelled. We don't know what we're going to do, because all our work is evaporated for the next month. At the time it was still a month, and it was kind of getting quite emotional because then, of course, people were getting stressed about how we're going to get home. I realized Canada was closing the border, and then I was figuring how am I going to get home, and I spoke to my partner because I was on that solo. He's like, well, if you have to stay in the US for a month, it's not too bad, and all that stuff. So it was all very bit stressful. Then again, as I said, I realized the flights were still going, so I could still get home. Then when we got into Fort Lauderdale, they took a while to get us off the ship, and we weren't sure what's on. And then all these ambulances came, and then we realized actually it was a medical issue, not a COVID issue. So there didn't appear to be any COVID on the ship, but they held us back because they wanted to get some people off the ship for medical, which we discovered wasn't COVID. Well, the captain came on and said it wasn't COVID related. So then, got off the ship. It was all very eerie, very weird. Jumped in a taxi, went to the airport. And because it was early, I then got a day room in the hotel. And I was like hiding in the hotel room, waiting for my flight because no one knew what it was. If you touch things, stuff. And then went into Miami Airport, which is where I was flying back from, and everything was kind of closed. All the shops were closed. Actually, was traveling business. I went into the business lounge. Everything was covered in like either closed off, or even the food was like all in these wrapped up, and it was all very weird. Got on the flight. There's still that, do you wear masks, don't you wear masks? No one really knew. Everyone was wiping everything down. And I think there was maybe, flight had maybe 20% full, something like that. That was when it really hit me, actually. It was more getting on in the Miami airport when all the shops were closed, and getting on the flight, realizing, oh my God, this is really like something's going on. On the cruise, it was because we were in our little bubble kind of thing. It felt less so because things were carrying on.
Sure.
But yeah, it was very weird. It was very weird.
So how did the lockdown affect the most popular cruise channel in the world?
Well, it's very interesting because obviously when it happened, I wasn't really sure what to do. And as it became clear, it wasn't really a month. But I really, like, my views, both on my blog and my YouTube channel, plummeted by like 80%. And I guess most people saw that because people just weren't watching any travel stuff. Obviously, the YouTube algorithm is very sensitive to what people are watching. So then I had a dilemma. Like, I had all these videos. Should I make them? Shouldn't I make them? And then I thought, well, should I just stop doing something completely? Just stop because no one wants to watch. Then I actually pivoted a bit and went into news because I realized there was this big gulf of news. And I started running a weekly news update where I'd look at everything that was going on, distill it, and say what I thought was happening and why I thought it was happening. And then I also started live streaming. So every week I started live streaming. And they did really well because, of course, people were at home. They were looking for things to do. And actually, YouTube started encouraging people to do live streaming because it was a big boom in live streaming. So that's when I started doing live streaming. So I did
Had you done live streaming before the pandemic?
No, I hadn't done any live streams. I literally started, I think I started in about the April, May time of when it was clear we were going to be locked down for a while. And then I started doing the weekly live stream, and that was really popular. But then the news things became really popular. And it's very interesting because when cruising resumed, so many crew members came up to me and said, thank you so much for what you did during the pandemic. Because, of course, these people don't have, as you know, they're on contract. They went home. They had no idea what was going on. So they used to watch my news channel, my news every week with what's going on. And so many crew members still today come up to me and say, thank you so much for that news you did when we were in lockdown, didn't know what was going on. So that's what I did. And then obviously once cruising started again, I switched back into making videos.
So when you started doing the news updates and the live streaming, did you see your channel starting to bounce back, or was that just keeping it?
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously
treading water.
it was nowhere of the scale that it was, but it wasn't underwater. It sort of went up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to remember. I was quite pleased with it because it was kind of big enough, and obviously the revenue was coming in a bit more, as well as the views went up. But also it was good because it gave me something to focus on, and also it was just really interesting following all the World Cruising Open and World Cruising Open, how the US is approaching it versus the UK versus Australia versus and Canada. So it was also interesting just politically and geographically and financially, looking at all the finance and stuff. So I found it quite interesting to do.
And it helped you hone some skills. I bet you are a pro at live streaming now.
Yeah, it definitely helped with the live stream. It was like also I realized live streaming was much easier than I thought it would be because the technology is so much easier. But yeah, and practicing live streaming was great. Yeah.
So talk about your first cruise back.
Yeah, so my first cruise, as you know, and I know you spoke, like Ben and David spoke when they were on the podcast, is the UK was one of the first, if not the first country to bring back cruising. But there were very strict rules around ships had to be, 1,000 people or 50%, whichever was the lower. It was cruises to nowhere or only around the UK, only UK residents and so on. So the first cruise I went back on was actually a 6-day cruise on Saga, which is a UK line targeting over 50s. And they have some very beautiful new ships, which they introduced, in fact, just before the pandemic. And I went on Spiritual Discovery. And it was a 6-day trip. But we actually did ports of call, which are all around places in the UK. So like, I think we went to Liverpool, we went down to Cornwall, and a few places, but lots of sea days. So that was my first cruise.
Now, was that late 20 or early 21?
It was in 21. It was in 21.
21, okay.
June 21, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was, I can actually tell you the exact date. So it was in the 27th of June to the 3rd of July, 2021.
Just an aside, when I wrote, I guess it was the second book, The Cruising Interrupted. I can't remember who I was interviewing, but someone was telling me about this new line for over 55. How's Saga doing?
Well, Saga, I mean, they've been around for a very long time. They're quite an old company, but they used to focus mostly in sort of escorted trips, so and all around the world. So, and they are a very big insurance company. I mean, that's how they started. Was actually
okay
in the 50s. So Saga is doing. I mean, Saga, the cruise line, it's quite premium and it's almost always sold out. They only have 2 ships. They sell out of the UK all year round, and they are quite hard to book. I mean, if you're not a UK resident, it's almost impossible to book. And I spoke to them about it, and they just said, well, because we sell out with UK residents, so we don't even have sales offices in other countries. And it's a great line. In reality, most of the passengers are kind of 70 and over rather than 50 and over. But they have such a die-hard thing because what they do is they pick you up from home, no matter what cabin you're in. You get taken to the port. Insurance is included. It's quite fairly all-inclusive.
Wow.
It's like it's a whole, which follows on from the kind of escorted touring kind of background. I mean, as a company, they're struggling a bit as a company overall because they got hammered from the insurance side, but their travel stuff is doing quite well. So yeah. Take
us through the highlights of your first several post-lockdown cruises.
Well, I've been cruising a lot since lockdown. I'm making up for lost time. I actually counted up before this. I've done 28 cruises since the end of shutdown.
Oh, holy cow! You've done as many post-lockdown cruises as I've done total cruises, and I've been cruising for over 30 years.
I basically cruised at least once a month, and I've been to the Galapagos, Antarctica, the Arctic, French Polynesia, South America, the fjords. Went to the Panama Canal again to do the whole thing. So I guess that so all of those have been highlights. I mean, the Antarctica and Panama Canal are my two most favorite things in the world. So those are probably the 2 biggest kind of highlights. Just that sense of being able to get out there and see them. And I think, like many people, post shutdown, going to these kind of exotic places that one probably had on one's list, but thought I'll get round to it. There's a sense of, after not being able to go, it's like I'm going to go to these places. So that's why I've did the Galapagos, did the Arctic, did Antarctica. Those got crank those up the list if you like.
So, Gary, let me take this opportunity to congratulate you on being on the short list for UK's Wave Award for favorite cruise blogger.
Thank you. Thanks.
Is that your first time shortlisted?
No, I think it's about my fifth.
Okay. Going to ask you how'd you feel when you first found out, but was it really novel because you've been selected before? But how do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it's good. I mean, I'm very grateful that I'm on the list because the way it works, as you probably know, is it's a kind of a series of rounds of kind of voting. So they put the magazine puts out a very long list of kind of everybody they sort of know that's UK based. Then they just ask people to vote, and I don't really go out and ask people to vote because I sort of don't want to harass my viewers and followers with asking to vote. So I always assume I'm never going to be on the short list, but clearly enough people like the channel enough to vote, that's enough. And then it goes to a short list, which people vote on, and then goes to the finalist list. So I'm always very grateful because I don't really go out and promote that I'm on the list and encourage people to vote. So I'm very grateful that people get me on, that I get on the list. I probably don't do enough sort of encouraging people to vote. So it's always the bridesmaid, never the bride kind of thing at those. So yeah.
Well, I have stated on social media that I will immediately invite the winner to be on the Joy of Cruising podcast. So hopefully we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Or I should say it's probably going to be several weeks, but we know we're going to see you again regardless. So what are you working on at Tips for Travelers?
So, I mean, what I'm working on at the moment is I'm getting ready because I'm going on, as the time of recording, so I'm going on my Japan trip. So I'm kind of working on that to make sure I'm getting all the videos that need to go live when I'm away, ready and finished and whatever. And then kind of just doing my kind of research and deciding the story angles and things I'm going to do for Japan. So I tend to, normally I'm a bit more organized, but I try to schedule, so I've got 4 or 5 videos kind of ready and in the pipeline. So when I'm away, I don't have to stress about downloading and uploading and all that sort of stuff. So I'm really focusing at the moment because I've been doing kind of quite a lot of cruises back quite close to each other, getting ready for that. And then planning next year already. So I know what I'm cruising next year and just then really looking at the schedule and planning and thinking what I'm going to focus on.
How can our listeners follow you on social media and the internet?
Well, I mean, the best place is obviously on YouTube, Tips for Travelers, which I always remind people, especially US, it's 2 L's, Tips for Travelers, 2 L's. Although in reality, if you search with 1 L in YouTube, it brings me up. So then I have a blog as well, which is also tipsfortravelers.com. And then I'm very active, particularly on trips on Instagram, which is Gary Bembridge, written together, and then on Facebook. So Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube are kind of my main things. And on Facebook, it's Tips for Travelers.
It's funny you mentioned how you emphasize how Travelers is with 2 L's, and I can't tell you how many times I have been asked auto corrected to the U.S. spelling of Travelers. Same thing when I mention favorite cruise blogger. When I'm talking about the Wave Awards, I spell it the way the Wave Award spells it, and so favorite doesn't work on the U.S. spell check. Let's shift gears to the future. You've already piqued my interest because you mentioned Japan. So my question is, what do you have booked?
So I have a lot because I tend to plan way in advance. So I kind of book through 24 into 25. So as we head into next year, I'm doing South Africa with Silver Sea. Then I'm doing, as I already mentioned, the Symphony of the Seas Caribbean. But I'm also then going straight onto Oceania Vista, which I really want to see. And then next year I also have 2 group cruises that I've got that I'm doing. One on Honda America Eastern Caribbean on the Eurodam in April, and then another which is on Celebrity Eclipse in September, which is an 11-night Boston, Maine, Canada group cruise.
So those group cruises are those tips for travelers group
Yes. Yeah.
cruises? Oh, okay. I didn't realize. Have you done those before?
No, I haven't. I've been asked a lot about doing group cruises, and I decided, I'd give them a go. So I'm doing 2 of them next year. So the one to the Caribbean and then one to kind of Canada, New England.
Well, good luck with that. How's signups are going pretty good, or it's
Yeah,
still too early?
no, it's going very well. Yeah.
Great. Anything else you have booked?
Yeah. So next year, I mean, I've also got. I'm going back to Antarctica, doing Alaska, trying the new Cunard Queen Anne, which I'm very excited about seeing.
Oh, wow.
And I'm doing another Panama Canal. So yes, busy year.
What are you sailing to Alaska?
So I'm actually doing Viking to Alaska. So I wanted to see what Viking, because I've done it before with Honor America Princess, and so I also want to update my Viking content. So and they're going to a couple of places that I haven't been to in Alaska. So that was, I love that. Yeah.
You got your eyes on any of the new ships coming down the pike?
So the main one is Queen Anne is the main one that I've really focused on at the moment. That's the main. That's only really new ship that I've got, brand new ship. I'm on the second cruise on
when is that due to debut?
Well, finally, because they were supposed to be earlier, and I think I was supposed to originally go in February, and then they cancelled through to May. So it launches at the beginning of May. Well, its first maiden voyage is in the beginning of May, which is a 7-night to Lisbon and back. Then the second voyage is a 14-night to the Canary Islands. That's the one I'm booked on. So beginning of May.
Longer term, what's on your bucket list? Seems like you've done it all. Is there anything you haven't done you'd like to do?
Yeah, I mean, the one you mentioned, Hawaii. I mean, I have been to Honolulu and as part of when we did a leg of the world cruise. So I would like to spend more time in Hawaii. And that trip that you did, I actually was looking at one time, which is a nice combination of the two. And the other places that, I mean, a bit like you, my list keeps growing longer. I really want to do the Suez Canal because I haven't done the Suez Canal. And I really want to do the Mississippi River cruise and the Great Lakes. Places that I really like to do. So those are probably the main ones, I think.
Well, I'm flattered. Gary Bembridge, of all people, wants to do a cruise that I did. Most of the time, I long to do cruises that you do. I live vicariously through you, and it's kind of nice. I don't know that I'll ever get on Viking or Oceania or Silver Seas or some of those lines, but I love hearing you talk about it. In fact, that's one of the things I think I alluded to that in the intro. One of the reasons, and this is just my theory, one of the reasons that you have such a large and growing audience is, I can sit and watch you talk about a cruise that I can pretty much say 100% I'll never go on, but I'll sit and watch and I'll be transfixed. And so, you don't only have to do the kind of cruise ships that I travel on. I mean, I just like to listen to it all, and I suspect there are a lot of other listeners who feel the same way. Well, before we let you go, Gary, a couple of light questions, maybe fun questions. It depends on your point of view, and then perhaps an oddball question that doesn't have anything to do with cruising. So the first question, it's an easy one. I just want to get some ideas. What's your favorite cruise drink and cruise food? Now I know that you're not a drinker, but anything. I mean, my wife is a teetotaler, so I know you like tea and other things like that. So what do you like to eat and drink on cruises?
I mean, I get very excited, which is probably a bit sad, if a cruise line has caffeine-free Diet Coke. Very few cruise lines have it. So it's one of my little tests is, like, do they have it? It's interesting, like a line like Holland America, for example, has caffeine-free Diet Coke. But then you can go on a very premium line and they don't have it. So when cruise line has caffeine-free Diet Coke, because I don't drink alcohol and I don't drink caffeine. So and my other thing, which I was very excited about on Symphony and on Norwegian, is they have a Starbucks, and everyone tells me off because they say, "Oh, Starbucks is not great coffee." I love a decaf Americano from Starbucks. So excited on Symphony that they had that. And my favorite, the food I love the most, which is what I think you actually spoke about with Ben and Dave, actually thinking about that as well, is my favorite cruise food is caviar, because I'm never going to buy caviar at home. It's crazy expensive, but I love the whole ceremony of caviar. So like if I'm on Cunard or in Queen's Quill or whatever, having caviar, or even when I was on Hapag Lloyd recently, they did caviar one night for dinner, which was included. So that's my real favorite. But I do like, and you were talking about it a bit earlier, lines that have really good sushi restaurant or something like that. I love that. Those are the things that I like the most.
My first time having caviar, early on, cruises, I'm sure you remember, used to have elaborate midnight buffet. And on my first ship, Sovereign of the Seas, they had a really, really elaborate midnight buffet, and it included caviar. I liked it, but I don't see caviar on any ships that I go on anymore. So maybe in the specialty restaurants, but I don't go to every specialty restaurant, but I'm sure some specialty restaurants. Where have you seen it? On what ships?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because on many cruise ships that have it, you do have to ask for it. So I've seen it on Cunard. If you're in Queen's Quill, you can ask for caviar, and it's included in the fare. So if I'm ever doing that, I'll have it quite often. As I said, on Hapag Lloyd, you could order it as an extra. It was quite expensive; it was like €60. But on the gala night, Captain's Farewell Gala Night, it was on the menu. Seabourn has it. So a lot of those sort of that Seabourn, Silver Sea, Crystal, those kind of lines of it tends to be kind of lines that have cost a lot of money to get on anyway. So they kind of have this as their thing. I'm trying to think. I felt there's another line I was on recently that had it. Oceania had it one night. They had Oceania where they will normally have a caviar evening where they have some sort of reception, and they'll do a whole big caviar thing as well. And there's music and caviar kind of canapé stuff. Yeah.
Now I know one thing that you comment on sometimes. So talk about that, because it's not all that familiar to me as U.S. based. Is afternoon tea.
Yeah, I mean, I did debate when you first asked me about my favorite food. I'm kind of, I suppose I'm known because I absolutely love afternoon tea. So, I have a list of which I think are the best lines for afternoon tea, but I do love like a proper, like English afternoon tea.
Yeah. Now that's kind of I'll speak for myself, but I suspect I'm speaking for a lot of U.S. listeners. Kind of foreign, to use a word, to U.S. listeners. So what is afternoon tea?
So afternoon tea is, and in fact, there's actually I do a whole article on my blog about it. I'm thinking I should make a video about it. But afternoon tea was originally created, I think it's by the Duchess of Bedford, if I remember correctly, and it was created because like she would get hungry in the afternoon. Her friends would get hungry sort of mid to late afternoon, and it was before they'd had the big dinner. So it started originally with little finger sandwiches, like little sandwiches like cucumber and stuff, and then they'd have some scones, and then they'd have little fancy cakes. So proper afternoon tea, ideally you'd get it on a tiered tray, and on the bottom level you'd have finger sandwiches, which would be like cucumber, smoked salmon, maybe chicken mayonnaise, something like that, and cut into little finger shape. Then the middle level would be scones, like normally warm scones, which you'd have with strawberry jam and clotted cream, which is like cream. And many cruise lines don't have it; they just have squirty cream, so they let themselves down. Then you'd have little fancy cakes on the top tray. So you'd eat it that way. You'd start at the bottom with the sandwiches, then you'd have the scones, then you'd have the little cakes at the top. That's the order that you would eat it in. Now, even online like Cunard, they would bring it around on trays, but it's normally like the fancy way to do it is on those tiered cake stands.
Now, that's standard, or correct me if I'm wrong, that's pretty standard on UK-based cruises, correct?
Yeah, very much so. So, the Cunard Princess, Fred Olsen, they would all do afternoon tea, normally included in the fare. Like P&O do have like a premium one, which you pay for, which is done by a very well-known kind of UK, well, it's actually French, but he lives in the UK, Eric Lanyard. He creates this very fancy one, which you pay for, but generally it's included. Yeah.
Okay.
Princess also does an afternoon tea, which varies. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. But
As I said, listeners, in the introduction, listening to Gary, I feel like I'm back in college, except I love my subject, cruising. So next light or fun question: what's your most memorable, or happiest, or funniest, or even most embarrassing cruise or port experience?
yeah, I can't really think of any like embarrassing or really funny ones as such. I mean, I think probably for me, the slash memorable slash happiness is, and I've already mentioned it, which is, you know, if I'm either in the Panama Canal, transiting the Panama Canal on a cruise ship, or I'm in the middle of Antarctica, that's when, to me, it's just the ultimate experience. I'm just the happiest. It's just that is my ultimate cruise experience. So either of those two.
What vessel did you sail to Antarctica?
So I've been twice so far. The first time I went was on Silver Sea Silver Cloud in 2019, and then in 2021, at the end of 2021, I went on Ponant La Lyrial.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that was mostly French passengers, and then I'm going to go next year again because I'm obsessed with it. I really want to see it again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go on Silver Sea again on the ship they bought from when Crystal went bust. So in depth.
Hey, curiosity question. So you mentioned Hapag Lloyd and what's the line that you just mentioned most with Ponant? Are you multilingual at all?
No.
No. Okay.
It can be quite challenging. In fact, the video script I'm working on today is about what it's like as an English speaker going on a German line, which Hapag Lloyd was. So, and I've been on a few. Like I've also been across Europe, around lots of river cruises around Europe, which is a French line. And I went on a canal barge once with across Europe where there was 50. It only takes 16 people, and 15 were French speakers, and me, the only English speaker. So
wow. The third question, the oddball question, and I only call it an oddball question because it's not necessarily related to cruising. So obviously you have a huge following, and welcome and thank you to Gary's friends and family and Tips for Travelers fans joining us today. I certainly hope you like what you hear and decide to come back and join us. Share one thing that my listeners and your friends and fans don't know about Gary.
Yeah, that's really hard because normally the one I would normally do is the military one. The fact I was a weapons instructor, but I've already blown that because I already revealed that one. I think the only other thing I can think of that surprises people is that I have tattoos. Most people think I'm a very straight lace kind of. I have three tattoos, which people are always like really surprised, and they're not really visible. Like it's only if they see me swimming or whatever, then they realize like, oh my God, you got tattoos. I didn't realize you got tattoos. But yeah, that's the only other thing I could think of that I've mentioned so far.
Great. Gary, it has been great talking to you. There were some other things I wanted to talk about. And as I said, I could just have a series on Gary Bembridge. You're just such a fascinating, and to use this word again, multifaceted individual. And so I'll say it again. I know I've said it before. We can't wait to have you back. Thank you so much for coming on the Joy of Cruising podcast. And continued all the best to you and Tips for Travelers. You're one of the top personalities in cruising, and I know you will be going on great adventures in the future, and I look forward to hearing about those. And as I said, just to reiterate, we're going to invite the Wave Award winner on sooner rather than later. So I hope to see you real soon.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. It's been great fun.
Gary, as they say, I'll see you on the ocean.
Hopefully. Thank you.
All right. Take care now, and all the best to you.
The Joy of Cruising and Cruising Interrupted, each $16.99 plus shipping, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again for $18.99 can be ordered at the link on thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com. For each of the 3 books, use the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast and get $4 off. The Joy of Cruising books are also available at Amazon. Order the ebook at Amazon or your favorite online retailer. Stay in touch by joining the Joy of Cruising Podcast Facebook group or following the Joy of Cruising Podcast on Instagram. We're constantly adding new shows. Please leave a review and tell a friend about us. We hope you enjoyed this brief escape to the ocean. See you next week.